Welcome back to Cat and Mouse Game Store. My name is Beth Heile, and I'm here once again to do another rules overview, this time of the new game Seasons, which is published in the United States by Asmodee Games. This is for 2 to 4 players and takes about an hour, although expect quite a bit more for your first game. The theme of this game is we are wizards or sorcerers who are competing in a 3-year tournament. The person who accumulates the most prestige points by the end of that 3-year term is going to be the winner. It's got a neat combination of some dice rolling, some cards, some drafting, and all that put together makes for an interesting game. So let's open up the box and take a look. First, let's start with some setup and some basic game terminology. Seasons takes place over 3 years, and which year you're in is represented by this cube. Each year is one cycle around this circular track. And as you can tell, each year is broken up into 4 seasons. This cube tells you what season you're in around the outside of the track. The game will always end when you reach the end of the 3rd year. Now, one of the most confusing bits to learn in this game in terms of setup is the difference between energy and crystals. Crystals are represented over here on this chart. You simply move your token to indicate how many you have at the time. Crystals can be spent during the course of the game to activate various cards, and they're all worth 1 prestige point each at the end of the game. It's one of the major ways you can get points to win at the end. That should not be confused, however, with energy. There are 4 different types of energy: earth, air, fire, and water, each represented by a different color and symbol. You're also going to be using those to activate various cards, and we'll get back to that a little bit later. For the rest of the setup, every player should put their crystal token here on 0. They should grab a player board here and again have a cube on each of the 2 0 counters. We'll get back to what those do in a moment. And then each player also needs to take a number 2 and a number 3 token, because our next step is to set up everyone's starting cards. Each player will be dealt 9 cards. From those 9, you're going to select 1 that you would like to keep, and you're going to pass the other 8 along to the next player around the table. In turn, you're going to be receiving another 8 cards from the person on your opposite side. From those 8, you're going to be selecting 1 that you would like to keep and passing the rest along, and so on until everyone has drafted 9 cards in total. So this is very similar to 7 Wonders if you've played that or other card drafting games. Now, once you have your 9 cards, and you have again some control over which 9 you get since you've drafted them, you're going to create 3 piles of 3. 3 cards is going to be your hand right now for the start of the game. 3 cards you're going to place under your number 2 token, and 3 cards you're going to place under your number 3 token. These cards will come into play at the start of year 2 and these at the start of year 3. So be very careful that you select the order in which your cards would like to come out. You will have the opportunity to perhaps gain more, but you can cluster cards together to be the most advantageous benefit to you at particular points in the game. Some cards definitely benefit best at the beginning, middle, or end of the game. So that's going to be one of the major strategic decisions you'll have to get you started in Seasons. Now we're going to start a round. We'll start over here in Winter. There should be 1 more dice than there are players. So we're going to assume we're in a 4-player game, so we're going to have 5 dice. The start player is going to roll all 5 of those dice and then choose 1 that they would like to keep. So perhaps I would like to keep this one. Then, going around the table, we're going to draft the rest of the dice. Each player will choose 1 dice that they wish to keep for the moment, and 1 dice will be left over and just placed here next to the board. Now you're ready to resolve some actions on your turn. Now we're ready for each player to take their turn, starting with the same start player as when you were drafting the dice. So we're going to say that that's me. I have a choice of 3 things that I might do. I can gain the bonuses that I see printed on the die that I chose. I can summon 1 or more of the cards from the 3 cards that I started with, or I may activate one or more of the bonuses here on my board. Now let's zoom in and we'll take a closer look at all three of those potential actions. Now let's look at all the different symbols that you're going to see on these die so you know what you're going to get when you decide to reserve one. To make this a little bit easier, you can ignore the dots that are at the bottom of each of these. That's involved with a little end of round cleanup, and we'll get back to that later. But for right now, you can ignore it. The most prevalent symbol you're going to see on these corresponds to the four elements that we've seen in this game already: earth, air, fire, and water. If you have a die that has some amount and type pictured, you're going to take that matching type and amount. For example, in this die over here on the left, I have one water and one air pictured, so I would take one water token and one air token. If you see a number picture, and they can be anywhere from 1 to 6, then you are going to get that number in crystals. And you would just move your a marker up here on this board, the corresponding amount. And a reminder that these crystals are worth victory points at the end of the game and also are very useful during the middle of the game when you're summoning. If you see a card picture, then you're going to draw one summoning card off the top of the deck. Now this is in addition to the 3 piles of 3 that you have already set up. So this card is going to go directly into your hand, and there is no limit to the amount of cards that you can hold in your hand. If you see a star, that's going to move you up one step along the summoning gauge, and you will see the same star picture here on your personal board. We don't know what the summoning gauge does yet, but sufficient to say for the moment, it's very good. And finally, if you see this sort of bumpy circle, that means you can transmute some of your tokens into crystals. How many crystals you get depends on what season we're in and what token you turn in. Anything that's in this outer ring is going to be on a 1-to-1 ratio. In winter, one water token, like so, turned back into the box is going to get me 1 crystal on that crystal chart. A fire will get me 2, and an earth will get me 3. If you are in a different season, however, you'll notice that the position of those tokens has moved. Now fire is going to give you the best ratio in terms of how many crystals you get. So make sure you're looking at the right quadrant when you're getting ready to turn in your tokens. Now let's look at your player board, and we're going to talk about summoning cards. Here's a close-up of your player board, and there's 3 areas that we want to look at. The first is the storage area for your tokens. We know that you can acquire tokens by gathering the appropriate amount and type from the die that you reserved. There's also cards that will help get you tokens as well. But you only have storage space for 7. At any point, if you exceed 7 tokens, then you're going to have to discard some of them to immediately get back down to 7. You can discard old ones or new ones, that doesn't matter. The second area that we're going to look at is the summoning gauge, and we mentioned that briefly a moment ago, which has this star symbol. So anytime you see a star on the die, you know it has to do with that summoning gauge. Each star on a die that you've reserved moves this gauge up 1 space. This gauge controls the amount of cards that you're allowed to have in play at any given time. So the beginning of the game, you start with 0. So while you can have lots of cards in your hand, unless you move that summoning gauge up, you will not be able to play any of them. Once you move this gauge up, however, you can then take an action to summon a card by paying its cost, as long as you don't exceed this total number of cards. Finally, you have your bonus area. There are 4 bonuses. I'm not going to describe them because they're really well laid out in the rule book, but they're all extremely valuable. However, there is a penalty for accessing them. The first time that you pick any one of these bonuses, you're going to move this cube 1 space over to the right. You can then choose any of these bonuses that you wish and resolve it immediately. Each time you pick a bonus, you are going to continue moving this cube over, and you are unfortunately accruing negative points that you're going to have to deal with at the end of the game. It is totally permissible to choose the same bonus 3 times in a row if you wish, but you're going to have to deal with the consequences of the negative points. Now let's look at some examples of cards that you can summon. Summon just means that you're going to take a card from your hand, pay the cost that's printed on the card, and lay it down on the table, and then its power goes into effect. The amount that you have to pay is right here underneath the picture. Sometimes it's an energy and it will specify what type and how much. Sometimes the type and the amount varies depending on how many players there are in the game. And finally, some are in the cost of other cards or in crystals. And if it's in crystals, you just subtract that amount from the crystal chart that we looked at earlier. There is a number in the top left of all of these cards. That's the amount of prestige points the cards are worth, which is going to be a significant part of your sum total, which will hopefully win you the game. Finally, there is a symbol down here in the lower left corner that indicates what type of card this is. Some cards have an effect that goes into play right when it is summoned. Some cards you have to pay an activation cost every time that you want that action to occur. And some are permanent effects that happen anytime a certain condition is met. All of those are really well explained in the rulebook. They actually have a breakdown of every single card in the game. So if you have any questions on a specific card, you can just refer to the rulebook. Again, you can summon as many cards as you want or you can afford on your turn. Going clockwise around the table, once every player has had the chance to do all the actions that they wish all at once, then we're going to be at the end of a round. We're going to figure out how many spaces this cube needs to advance around the track before we start the new round. How many spaces? Well, that depends on the last die that was left over. Now we know what those dots are for that are at the bottom that we skipped in our explanation from before. Each dot is 1 space along this outer track. So for example, in this leftover 5th dice from our 4-player game, there are 2 dots pictured, so we're going to advance our cube 1-2 spaces. If you're still within the same season, then you're going to be using the same set of dice and the same transmutation table. If you advance into a new season, however, make sure you grab the appropriate set of dice, and now you're working off of this transmutation table. Whenever you start a new round, you're also going to have a new start player, and that's just whoever is sitting to the left of the current start player. So just make sure everyone should have a chance to be the start player. Now, if in calculating this season movement, you move from the 12 and cross over into a new year, then 2 extra things happen. First, you're going to advance that year marker in the middle. And second, you get to unlock the cards that you reserved at the beginning of the game. These simply get added to your hand of whatever cards you have at the moment. If you're already in year 3 and you cross that 12-1 boundary, then you've now triggered the end of the game. Once we finish the 3rd year, we're going to figure out who's the winner by whoever has the most prestige points. We're going to add up your amount of crystals, so 41 crystals equals 41 points. We'll add to that the value of any cards that you've summoned and have in play. Keep in mind, some may be negative values. And then finally, you're going to subtract any amount of bonus penalty points that you've accrued, and that will be your final total. Whoever has the most prestige points is going to be the winner of Seasons. Well, that's most of what you need to know to get started playing Seasons. In the rulebook, you should also be careful. There is a setup for an initial game, an intermediate game, and an advanced game. And there's some specific cards that go with the advanced game. So just make sure you've got the right set of cards for the level of difficulty that you'd like to play. Now, Seasons has a really interesting mix of some Euro game mechanics, some fighting, and some fantasy. So if you're looking for that unique combination, well, there's not too many other games that meet that bill, but here's my best try. You might want to look at Colossal Arena, which is another monster fighting monsters type of theme. Players are secretly betting that one monster will win. And through card playing, you can partially try and control which monsters are going to get eliminated. If your secret monster makes it all the way to the end of the championship, then you hopefully will score the most points. You might also want to check out Couriers, which made a big splash last summer. Just like Seasons, it also has a really unique mix of cards and dice and fighting and fantasy. So if you like one, there's a pretty good chance you'll like at least the theme of the other. Finally, if you liked the drafting idea in Seasons, if you like the idea that you pass all the cards around in the beginning and you pass the dice around, well, if you haven't tried it yet, you gotta try the drafting games of all drafting games, which is Seven Wonders, which is now the Spiel des Jahres winner as well. There's a lot to be said about Seven Wonders, and I'm sure you can find a million people who say it, but if you haven't tried it yet, you definitely should. So we have all these available here at Cat and Mouse, of course. And we're always good for a good battle or two here on a Wednesday or Thursday night, so come on in and give us a try.